Hey, good morning. Running late this morning. Have some thoughts. This is Cultivate Your Heart for July 31st of 2024. And as you have no doubt known, have no doubt heard, the Olympics are in full swing. The Olympics opening ceremony was this past weekend, and there was a lot of discussion about the Olympics opening uh, ceremony and the connection and the affiliation that many people made with what they saw in the opening ceremony and Da Vinci's famous painting of the Last Supper and how those are similar and how they're not similar. And all of that um, kind of got me thinking about Acts chapter 17. And in Acts chapter 17, it's one of my favorite texts of the Bible. Um, Paul has um, three different places where he goes and proclaims the gospel. The first of those places is in Thessalonica, where he proclaims the gospel, and some people are converted, and he gets chased out of town. He moves on to Berea, where he proclaims the gospel, starting off again in the synagogue. And the people of Berea are of a more noble character because they compare the things that he's saying to the scriptures, to ensure that what he's doing is faithful to God. Um, and then when the people in Thessalonica hear that he's in Berea, they move on to Berea, and again Paul is chased out of Berea, and then Paul goes to Athens, and this is where I think for us, um, we have some things that we can think about as we consider how we interact with the world in terms of like how they respond to Christianity, how they think about Christianity. And so, what I thought I would do this morning is just read um, part of Acts 17, actually, a lot of Acts 17, when Paul is in Athens. And I think it just will inform us in how we interact with people um, who are not Christians. How do we interact with the world? And I don't know. I've seen lots of things about the Olympic opening ceremony, and that it was a representation of the Last Supper, that it wasn't a representation of the Last Supper, and um, like I haven't studied enough to be able to say yes, this is what this was, or no, this wasn't. But what I thought I would do is just read through Acts 17 this morning and have a little bit of conversation, have a little bit of discussion, because I think what Paul does in Acts 17 can inform us in the way that we interact with the world. So take it or leave it. This one's going to be a little longer. I am on a time crunch because we have a meeting at 9 here. But I'm just going to read through Acts 17 and share some thoughts. And um, if you have some questions, you can interact, but we'll just do this. So this is Acts 17, verse 16. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was deeply troubled by all the idols he saw everywhere in the city. So it is reasonable for Christians when they see things that are not of God or are against God, it is reasonable for Christians to have thoughts, feelings, and emotions about that. Okay? It's reasonable for us to see things that are happening and have thoughts, feelings, and emotions about those things. He went to the synagogue to reason with the Jews and the God fearing Gentiles, and he spoke daily in the public square to all who happened to be there. So Paul is waiting for Timothy and Silas to get to Athens, and he is spending his time walking around Athens, studying Athens, and he sees these idols everywhere, and he is deeply troubled by the fact that these people are worshiping false gods. When you worship false gods, essentially you're turning your back on the God. So Paul is upset about this. Paul is worked up about this. And what he does in response to that is he goes and he proclaims the gospel. That is Paul's response, is he goes and he proclaims the gospel. Verse 18, he also had a debate with some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. When he told them about Jesus and his resurrection, they said, "What's this babbler trying to say with these strange ideas he's picked up?" Others said, "He seems to be preaching about some foreign gods." So, when Paul is preaching the gospel to these pagans, to these Greeks, to these philosophers, they responded. They had some thoughts. They had some questions. What is Paul trying to say? He's talking about a foreign god. Like, what's going on here? So Paul takes his anger and his frustration, his maybe disappointment, maybe his disgust at the way that all of these people are worshiping false gods. And what Paul does with that is he proclaims the gospel. And some people have some questions about it. He proclaims the gospel in a way that people are curious. Then they took him to the high council of the city. "Come and tell us about this new teaching," they said. "You are saying some rather strange things, and we want to know what it's all about. It should be explained that all the Athenians, as well as the foreigners in Athens, seem to spend all their time discussing the latest ideas." That sounds like Facebook. Like we've seen that. We've seen that over the last Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. We've seen that over the last 4 days of all of the conversation that people have about the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. What was it about? What wasn't it about? It was about this. It was about that. How should Christians think? How should Christians feel? Like everyone is weighing in. Like I still, days after this event, I still cannot scroll through my Facebook feed without someone else having a new thought, a new thought, a new thought, a new opinion on the Olympic ceremonies. And I'm sort of doing that now, but not really, because I didn't do all the research. We're just talking about what the Bible has to say. What happens when we interact with people who believe differently than us? Um, so Paul proclaims, he sees all the idols. He is upset, frustrated, angry, disgusted. He begins to share the gospel. And the people in the culture are like, "Hey, we're actually interested in what you have to say, because you're talking about this and we want to hear what you have to say. So we would love for you to come to," it was a special place. It was called the Areopagus. It's called Mars Hill. It's a special place where everyone goes and all they do is they talk philosophy. So it's the Facebook of whenever, 45, 40 AD. So Paul, standing before the council, addressed them as follows: "Men of Athens, listen to this. This is one of my favorite things in the entire world. I notice that you are very religious in every way." Right? So listen to what Paul says. He doesn't say, "Hey, all you stupid, wicked pagans, you're worshiping false gods. You're doing all these things wrong. You're going cuckoo crazy." And Paul doesn't go cuckoo crazy. Paul would not be the guy that is going to write 82 Facebook posts about the wicked pagans in Athens. "I notice that you are very religious in every way." Isn't that amazing? Isn't that fantastic? "For as I was walking along, I saw your many shrines. And one of your altars had this inscription on it: 'To an unknown God.'" See, Paul certainly was upset and frustrated and angry and deeply troubled. Paul felt that. But when he had the opportunity to talk to the people of Athens, he actually compliments them. "Men of Athens, I noticed that you are very religious in every way. For as I was walking along, I saw your many shrines. I saw all of the ways that you worship all of these different gods, all of these different goddesses. You are very religious people. And one of your altars had this inscription on it: 'To an unknown God.' This God, whom you worship without knowing, is the one I'm telling you about." See, so the people of Athens, like they had all of these idols, they had all of these places, all of these shrines, all over the city, and one of them was called to an unknown God. And kind of I see that in my mind's eye, like it was like a little hole in the wall, right? And there was a brass tag at the bottom that says to an unknown God, and there was nothing there because they don't know what this God looks like. So essentially what the people of Athens are doing, like, right, they're covering their bets, right? We have all of these gods and goddesses that we worship, but there might be one out there that we've missed. So we're going to make him a shrine. And what does Paul do? He says, that God, that's the one I'm talking about. That's who I'm talking about. That's who I'm talking about. It's that God. He is the God who made the world and everything in it. Since he is Lord of heaven and earth, he doesn't live in man made temples, and human hands can't serve his needs, for he has no needs. He himself gives life and breath to everything, and he satisfies every need. From one man, he created all the nations throughout the whole earth. He decided beforehand that when they should rise and fall, and he determined their boundaries. See, what Paul is doing here is like so stinking genius. He knows that they're worshiping all these false gods. He knows that they have a little hole in the wall to the God that they don't know. So Paul's like, dude, that's who it is. That's who I'm telling you about. This is the God I'm talking to you about. And then what he's saying is, and this is how God is different. This is how this God is different. This God is different because he doesn't live in man-made temples like your gods do. Human hands can't serve his needs, for he has no needs. Your gods all have needs. My God, God doesn't have needs. He gives life and breath to everything. He satisfies our needs. From one man, he created all things, all the nations. He knows when nations are going to rise and nations are when they're going to fall. See, this is a completely different mindset than the way we typically think about how we ought to respond to idolatry, how we ought to respond to pagan gods and goddesses. This is completely different. I want you to be thinking about what you've seen over the last 4 or 5 days in the way that we have responded. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I got to turn that off. I got to turn that off. That was cuckoo. I never want that to happen again. So we need to think about how we are responding. His purpose, Paul continues, verse 27, his purpose was for the nations to seek after God and perhaps feel their way toward him, though he is not far from any one of us. And I love the next couple verses. Paul does something that we as Christians, for the most part, have no clue how to do. For in him we live and move and exist. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Here's what Paul just did. Paul just did a deep dive back into the history and the culture and the philosophical understandings of the Greeks, and he used their own words to talk about the reality of God. Here's what he's saying. See, these Greek poets, I think it's Cleanthes and Aratus. I probably pronounced those wrong. Cleanthes and Aratus. See, when they said those words, so these are the sayings. For in him we live and move and exist. That's a saying of a Greek philosopher. We are his offspring is a saying of a Greek philosopher. And what Paul is doing here is he's saying, when they wrote those words, they thought they were talking about maybe Zeus or the Greek gods, but who they were really talking about was God. And he is taking their words and he's saying, this is what's really going on here. For he has set a day for judging the world with justice by the man he has appointed, and he proved everyone who this is by raising him from the dead. Notice that Paul never mentions Jesus. Man, I love this so much. See, Paul is playing the long game here. Paul knows that the pathway to evangelism, that the pathway to the proclamation of the gospel, Paul knows that it is the long game. Paul is playing the long game. When they heard Paul speak about the resurrection of the dead, some laughed in contempt. Right? We've kind of seen that. People have responded to the way Christians have responded to the Olympics opening ceremony by laughing with contempt. But others said, "We want to hear more about this later." That ended Paul's discussion with them, but some joined him and became believers. And some people even became believers. Among them were Dionysius, a member of the council, a woman named Damaris, and others with them. So, what does all of this mean? Olympic opening ceremonies. How should we respond? I just want you to think about the way Paul responded. When Paul saw the wickedness and the pagans and the idolatry and the false worship and the rejection of God, what Paul did was he entered into it. He walked into that space, and regardless of what he was thinking and feeling on the inside, he proclaimed the gospel faithfully. And he even managed to help the people that he was proclaiming the gospel to, he even managed to celebrate them. He even managed to honor them. He even managed to elevate them. He even managed to demonstrate that he understood what they were thinking and what they were feeling. So I wonder, as we think about Olympic opening ceremonies, as we think about the way that we interact with our culture, what can we learn from Paul in Acts 17? I love you. I'm praying with you and I'm praying for you. And my hope and my prayer for you is that you will enter into relationships with people who do not know Jesus. And you will be generous with them. You will be kind to them. You will love them. You will honor them. You will serve them. And you will proclaim the truth to them. Have a super Wednesday.